I hope that you liked the first part of this documentary on Egypt. In the second part, I will start with Luxor, where you will see the Valley of Kings. Here, 64 tombs of pharaohs have been discovered so far. Then, I will show you the Valley of Queens. Then, I will take you inside a pit, where they were in the process of digging and discovering several mummies while I was there. Then, I will take you across Egypt, along River Nile, to show you various temples of pharaohs. During the last hour of this part of the documentary, you will get to watch the Nubian Museum in Aswan. While watching the ancient Egyptian artifacts, you will get to listen to the legendary story of pharaohs, Osiris, Seth, and Isis. Then, I will show you the real Nubian culture, including a wedding engagement party. Enjoy! In the ancient times, rulers of Egypt were called pharaohs. In this part of the documentary, while traveling along the River Nile banks, from Cairo to south of Aswan, I will show you the tombs and chapels of some of the pharaohs of the last 36 dynasties. First, let me take to Luxor. Of all Egypt, this place has the most tombs and chapels. My first stop is the Valley of Kings. The valley is located in the cliff of the west bank of Thebes. Thebes is a Greek name for the ancient city that is presently spread from Luxor to Karnak. The tombs in the Valley of Kings are numbered. For example, KV1 means, tomb number 1 in the Valley of Kings. There are 64 caves found so far. The soil is an alternating sandwich of dense limestone and other sedimentary rock. The valley was used for primary burials from approximately 1539 BC to 1075 BC, and contains at least 64 tombs, during the reign of Amenhotep I, and ending with Ramesses X or XI, although non-royal burials continued in usurped tombs. Central area appears to have been flooded at the end of the 18th dynasty and buried several tombs under meters of debris. The tombs KV63, KV62 and KV55 are dug into the actual Wadi bedrock rather than the debris, showing that the then level of the valley was 16 feet below its present level. No vegetation grows in this valley. All the tombs are embellished with hieroglyphs and wall paintings showing the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. The king was embalmed and buried with a vast collection of goods, so that he would have everything he needed when he awoke to the afterlife. Small models of people, known as Shakti figures, were included in the tomb. It was thought that these would come alive and become the pharaoh's servant in the afterlife. Tomb size ranges from just a pit to complex tombs with over 120 chambers. It was the principal burial place of the major royal figures, together with those of a number of privileged nobles. With only one exception, all these tombs were plundered by grave robbers almost as soon as the king was buried. It has been estimated that so much gold was buried with each pharaoh that the country would have gone rapidly bankrupt, except that the grave robbers reintroduced the gold into the economy each time. Most of these tombs are small, often only consisting of a single burial chamber accessed by means of a shaft or a staircase with a corridor or a series of corridors leading to the chamber, but some are larger, multiple-chambered tombs. These minor tombs served various purposes. Some were intended for burials of lesser royalty or for private burials, Some contained animal burials and others apparently never received a primary burial. The most impressive tombs in the valley are the tomb of Seti I and the tomb of Ramses III. Both of these are huge, with a series of rooms and corridors, all adorned with paintings showing the path of the pharaoh on his way to the afterlife. There is nothing in the tombs now except the paintings, but originally, they would have been furnished like palaces. The one tomb that was not plundered in ancient times is that of Tutankhamun. His tomb is a simple one, with only 2 small rooms. He died suddenly. His tomb had originally built for some lesser noblemen. Nevertheless, Tutankhamun was given a right send-off, with more gold than has ever been seen anywhere outside of Egypt. The tomb was sealed and forgotten about. Soon afterwards, another tomb was built almost on top of it, so Tut's tomb was not found until the 20th century. The treasures that were found in the tomb are now on display in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, but the pharaoh's body was examined and then replaced in the tomb, so King Tut still lies there waiting for the afterlife in his golden sarcophagus. The wall paintings are rather crude and hurried looking compared with those of other pharaohs. They look new, as if they were only painted yesterday, because the tomb was sealed for more than 3,000 years. There is nothing in the tomb now other than the body of the pharaoh in a sarcophagus. Tomb KV1 was used for the burial of Pharaoh Ramesses VII of the 20th dynasty. It consists of the entrance, a passageway, the burial chamber containing the sarcophagus, and a final smaller room at the end. He was in the 7th year of his reign when he died. Tomb KV6 was the final resting place of the 20th dynasty Pharaoh Ramesses IX. The quality of decoration indicates that the tomb was not finished in time for his death but was hastily rushed through to completion. Tomb KV8 was used for the burial of Pharaoh Merenptah of 19th dynasty. The burial chamber, located at the end of 500 feet of corridor, originally held a set of 4 nested sarcophagi. Tomb KV9 was originally constructed by Pharaoh Ramesses V. He was interred here, but his uncle Ramesses VI later reused the tomb as his own. The layout is typical of the 20th dynasty, the Ramesside period, and is much simpler than KV11, the tomb of Ramesses III. Tomb KV11 is the tomb of Pharaoh Ramesses III. It was originally started by Setnecht, but abandoned when it broke into KV10, the earlier tomb of Amenmès. Setnecht was buried in KV14. The tomb was restarted on a different axis for Ramesses III. Tomb KV14 is a joint tomb, used originally by the female Tuasret, and then reused and extended by male Setnecht. It has 2 burial chambers, the later extensions making the tomb one of the largest of the royal tombs, at about 350 feet. Later, the name of Setnecht was replaced by those of Seti II. Tomb KV15 was used for the burial of Pharaoh Seti II of the 19th dynasty. Today the sarcophagus is missing and an unknown mummy rests in the tomb. Much of the painted decoration is intact, and the plaster appears to be relatively stable. KV16 was unfinished at the time of the death of Ramesses I. It has suffered from flood damage. As Ramesses I ruled for less than 2 years, his tomb was only 92 feet long. The sarcophagus, still in place in the final chamber, is constructed of red quartz. Tomb KV34 was the tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose III. One of the first tombs to be dug in the valley, it was cut high in the cliff face of the furthermost wadi. A steep corridor leads down to the chamber. Many of the wall decorations are in an unusual style not found elsewhere in the Valley of the Kings. The stone sarcophagus in which Thutmose was laid to rest is still in place in the burial chamber. Tomb KV47, located in the Valley of the Kings, was used for the burial of Pharaoh Sikta of the 19th dynasty, though the mummy of Sikta was found in KV35. Shaktis from the tomb of the Pharaoh Sikta, from KV47, now residing in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. My second stop Deir el-Bahari is located, just quarter-mile, behind the Valley of Kings. However, since there is no direct road, we had to drive around 5 miles to reach there. On the right-hand side, you can see some tombs. One of the tombs, number 34, on the right is that of Nekhupiter Mentuhotep II. He was 5th pharaoh of 11th dynasty. He reigned for 51 years until his death in 1995 BC. He had a son with his chief wife Tem, named Mentuhotep III, who became a pharaoh after the death of his father. Qaid, Sada, Ashayat, Henhanat and Kemsit were secondary wives of Pharaoh Mentuhotep II. All wives were found buried in this terrace temple. The sarcophagus of Qaid was discovered the last, in 1907. There are several other tombs up there, but further excavation had to be stopped due to the poor quality of bedrock. On the top, you can see the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Egyptians jokingly nickname her as hot chicken soup. Makher Hatshepsut was the 5th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty during 1503 BC to 1482 BC. She was one of the most successful pharaohs, ruling longer than any female ruler of an indigenous dynasty. She was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, and the wife of his successor Thutmose II, who died before she bore a son. Rather than step aside for the secondary wife who had borne him an heir, the queen became co-regent of her stepson, the young Thutmose III. Soon she assumed absolute power. To legitimize her powerful position, Hatshepsut had herself depicted with the kilt and beard of a pharaoh. She was a prolific builder, commissioning hundreds of construction projects throughout both Upper and Lower Egypt. After the death of Hatshepsut, Thutmose III became pharaoh. Perhaps fearing a challenge to his legitimacy as a successor, he immediately chiseled all images of Hatshepsut off temples, monuments, and obelisks. That is the reason all of her faces are defaced. This 100-foot causeway leads to the temple, which consists of 3 terraced courtyards covered in sculptural reliefs. Originally, sphinxes probably lined the path from the Nile to the base of the temple. The terraces were softened and cooled by myrrh trees, green gardens, and fountains. The queen herself acquired the trees on a famous journey to the land of Punt, which is depicted in one of the colonnades of the middle terrace. You can see pairs of lions flank the top and bottom of the ramp to the middle terrace, one of each survives today. The right side of the terrace contains the birth colonnade, featuring faded reliefs of the divine origins of Hatshepsut. From left, her parents Thutmose I and Queen Amosis sit with their knees touching. Gods lead Amosis into the birth chamber. The god Khnum creates Hatshepsut and her Ka on a potter's wheel. Bes and Heket, the frog god, look on. Goddesses nurse her, and Thoth records details of her reign. At the end of the birth colonnade and down some steps is the chapel of Anubis, with fluted columns and colorful murals. Over the niche on the right, Thutmose III is shown offering wine to Socaris, a sun god with a head of falcon. Hathor is on the facing wall. Other walls depict Hatshepsut and Thutmose making offerings to Anubis, the dog-headed god. The left side of the terrace is occupied by the Punt colonnade, whose faint reliefs depict the journey of Hatshepsut to the land of Punt, the birthplace of Amun, to bring back myrrh trees for her temple. The destination is believed to be in modern-day Somalia. From left, Amun commissions the journey. Egyptian boats sail from the Red Sea coast and are welcomed by the king of Punt and his wife. The Egyptians offer metal axes and other goods and leave with myrrh trees, ebony, ivory, cinnamon, and panther skins. The last relief shows the trees being planted at the temple. At the end of the Punt colonnade is the chapel of Hathor, with capitals in the shape of the face of goddess and sacred rattle. In the first chamber, Hathor appears in bovine and human forms and suckles Hatshepsut on the left wall. The next chamber has remarkably colorful reliefs of festival processions. Inside the gated sanctuary of the chapel of Hathor are reliefs of Hatshep worshipping the Hathor on the left and a portrait of Senenmut on the right. Senenmut was the favorite courtier of the queen. When this sanctuary was first discovered, it contained stacks of baskets full of wooden penises, perhaps used in fertility rituals. On the top terrace is the Geyser Geyseru, a colonnaded structure built into a cliff face that rises sharply above it. From a distance, the temple looks like the Egyptian hieroglyphic for Nun, a four-step pyramid representing the primordial mound from which Amun was born. The upper terrace is reached via a ramp flanked with the heads of vultures. The sanctuary of Hatshepsut is on the left. It bears reliefs of priests and offerings. On the other side is the sanctuary of the sun, an open court with a central altar. In the center in the far back is the sanctuary of Amun, dug into the cliff and aligned so that it points towards the tomb of Hatshepsut in the Valley of the Kings. The monarchy of Pharaohs started about 5,200 years ago with Pharaoh Menes. He was the pharaoh who combined the Upper and Lower Egypt. I have discussed about him in part 1 in Memphis. The monarchy ended in 342 BC, with the last native pharaoh, Nectanebo II. One of the cultural developments in the Nile Valley was the invention of writing. Over the years around 1,200 hieroglyphs signs have been detected with a core of around 800 from which a selection of around 100 were more frequently in use. Hundreds of tombs and chapels have been found all along the Nile River banks which are filled with writings on the walls describing the history of respective pharaoh, worth thousands of pages. That was a great way to pass the knowledge of that great civilization to us, firsthand. Excluding the early period, pharaohs had 30 dynasties. Legendary period had over 50 pharaohs. Early period had 8 pharaohs in the Lower Egypt, and 5 pharaohs in the Upper Egypt. First 4 dynasties had 36 pharaohs. I have shown tombs and temples of some of them in part 1. The most prominent temple at Deir el-Medina is the Ptolemaic Temple. It was dedicated to goddesses Hathor and Mat. It sits within a tall mud brick enclosure wall. Its compound embraces the sites of several New Kingdom temple structures and small chapels, erected by Deir el-Medina inhabitants. The sanctuary was cut into the rock at an angle. Behind it was a narrow corridor, which continued from the rear to the north side of the sanctuary. Dozens of Greek, Demotic and Coptic Christian graffiti cover the temple's outer walls. Close to temple lies the tomb of Sen-Nedjem. He was an artisan of Pharaohs. Sen-Nedjem used to live nearby at the beginning of the 19th dynasty. He shared this tomb with his wife Iyan, of Mehdi, and his extended family members. When the tomb of Sen-Nedjem was found, it had regular furniture from his home, including a stool and a bed, which he actually used when he was alive. The mummy of Iyan, of Mehdi, can be seen in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. On the left side of the tomb, I saw a small iron gate that was closed. Upon my request, the caretaker led me to a dark chamber through that gate. It was spooky, but somehow, I did not feel scared. I just kept on staring at the moving torchlight in the pit with amazement. I was so close to ancient Egyptian mummies, and was even able to touch them. It was a very large pit with bones, skulls, linen, and mummies wrapped in linen scattered all around. They must have uncovered tombs of at least 20 people in that pit. It is so easy to bribe the caretakers and take a mummy with you. But, do not even think about it. A seasoned traveler always leaves the place as he or she finds it. Ramesses II became the third king of the 19th dynasty at the age of 25. He was born in 1314 BC, and died at the age of 90 in 1224 BC, 3 times the average lifespan of that time. During his reign, he built several temples across Egypt. The original entrance to the temple faced the river, but this entrance is now closed, and visitors enter from the side. One of the ways he achieved God's approval to justify his rule for 66 years and 2 months was through architecture. That is why he is also called Ramesses the Great. On many already built temples and existing statues, he had his own cardouche inscribed to ensure that his name lived on. The inscriptions were deeply carved into the structures to ensure that they could not be easily destroyed or removed by succeeding empires. In the forecourt, there are several impressive statues of Ramses II in the form of Osiris, but the most atmospheric statue is massive and carved in rose granite. It once stood almost 18 meters high and now lies face down on the ground, broken. It weighs over 1,000 tons and was destroyed in the earthquake of 27 BC. Beyond the crumbling forecourts and the statues of Ramses as Osiris, the temple is remarkably intact with 29 of the original 48 columns in the hypostyle hall still standing. The middle columns are larger. As is typical with such structures, giant wall reliefs trumpet the pharaoh military accomplishments and proclaim Ramesses II immortality. The most momentous event in his reign was the Battle of Kadesh, who he fought against the Hittites. The battle was fought in Syria in the 5th year of his reign. Here, you can see Ramesses II, in Kadesh battle in chariot dashing into battle, and the dead and wounded chaotically on the ground. On his monuments, the battle was commemorated as a great victory. As a matter of fact, I found paintings of Ramses II in Kardish battle all over Egypt. Having said that, the Hittite account found at their capital suggests that the battle was closer fought. Under the treaty, Hittite king would rule under Ramesses II, and he also got married with 2 Hittite princesses. Some used this place as a house. Others used it for storage of offerings like wheat. Pharaohs were considered to be a connection of common people for their journey from earth to heavens. The more they made the pharaoh happy, the more chances that they would get a better place in heavens. Here, you can see Ramesses II taking an ankh, the key of life, from god Amun-Ra, the king of gods who was the solar creator god. That means god Amun-Ra is wishing Ramesses II a long life. Behind him Shishat, the goddess of wisdom, is blessing him as well. On the side you can see names of Ramesses II saying, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Son of Sons. This is a different title for him written only here. Here, you can see Ramses II wearing the 2 crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolizing his control over the country. In his hands are the crook and the flail, which represent his power over his subject. Ramesses II fathered 102 sons, and 99 daughters, the largest of any Egyptian pharaohs. He had 75 wives, some royal and some non-royal. Although mortuary temples were designed for the rituals of the mortuary cult, they were dedicated, as this one, to Amun-Ra. Next, you can see Ramesses II, kneeling in front of god Amun-Ra, and offering him gifts. Behind him is his wife, Madom-Phryra, who was a Hittite princess, and son, Khums. You can also see Isis recording the event by writing it down. Here is the god of fertility, Min, wearing a crown, and a flail in his right hand, with an erect penis. He was considered the creator of all gods and men. He was the son of Isis and Osiris. Min was an ancient Egyptian god, whose cult originated in 4th millennium BC. According to legend, he had black skin, and only 1 arm and 1 leg. His reference is not for sexual gratitude, but for continuity of life. His mummy is believed to be located in the Nubian Museum, Oxford, England. Built around 1350 BC, the Colossi of Memnon are 2 massive statues made from blocks of quartzite sandstone, depicting Pharaoh Amenhotep III, in a seated position. The original function of the Colossi was to stand guard at the entrance to the mortuary temple of Amenhotep, where he was worshipped, both before and after his departure from this world. This used to be the largest temples of ancient Egypt, covering 86 acres. Today, it is almost completely disappeared, except for these 2 statues. Both statues are quite damaged, with the features above the waist virtually unrecognizable. The Karnak Temple is situated right at the banks of River Nile. The steps you see in a distance used to be the harbor. Being so close to the river banks, Karnak Temple was very vulnerable. Each year, during the flood season, the mud would cover the temple grounds. Over a 1,000-year period, the temple was almost buried under the silt. Besides, during the earthquake of 27 BC, almost all of the temple fell down. Eventually, common people started building their houses, not only around the temple, but also on top of the temple. Recently, the government started restoring the temples and forced people out and around the temple. The Karnak temple complex, usually called Karnak Kama, comprises a vast mix of decayed temples, chapels, pylons, and other buildings. At the entrance, this room was used for the common people to drop their offerings. The offerings included things like papyrus flowers, wheat, silver, and gold. The complex is a vast open-air museum and the largest ancient religious site in the world. Construction on the Karnak temple complex began in the 16th century BC and continued into a period of up to 1,300 years of construction. Approximately 30 pharaohs contributed to the buildings, enabling it to reach a size, complexity, and diversity not seen elsewhere. Few of the individual features of Karnak are unique, but the size and number of features are overwhelming. The deities represented range from some of the earliest worshipped, to those worshipped much later in the history of the ancient Egyptian culture. Although destroyed, it also contained an early temple built by Amenhotep IV, the pharaoh who later would celebrate a near monotheistic religion. He established that prompted him to move his court and religious center away from Thebes. It also contains evidence of adaptations, using buildings of the ancient Egyptians by later cultures for their own religious purposes. It is the mother of all religious buildings, the largest ever made and a place of pilgrimage for nearly 4,000 years. It covers about 200 acres, 1 mile by half mile. The area of the sacred enclosure of Amun alone is 61 acres, and would hold 10 average European cathedrals. The Hypostyle Hall at 54,000 square feet with its 134 columns is still the largest room of any religious building in the world. Arranged in 16 rows, 122 of these columns are 33 feet tall, and the other 12 are 65 feet tall, with the diameter of 10 feet. The architraves on top of these columns are estimated to weigh 70 tons. These architraves may have been lifted to these heights using levers. This would be an extremely time-consuming process and also would require great balance to get to such great heights. A common alternative theory about how they were moved is that there were large ramps made of sand, mud, brick or stone, and the stones were towed up the ramps. If they used stone for the ramps, they would have been able to build the ramps with much less material. The top of the ramps presumably would have either wooden tracks or cobblestones for towing the megaliths. There is an unfinished pillar in an out-of-the-way location that indicated how it would have been finished. Final carving was executed after the drums were put in place so that it was not damaged while being placed. The hall covers an area of 64,586 square feet. In addition to the main sanctuary, there are several smaller temples and a vast sacred lake. All Egyptian temples had a sacred lake, Karnak one is being the largest. It was used during festivals when images of the gods would sail across it on golden barges. Karnak was also the home of a flock of beasts dedicated to Amun. There are over 25 temples and chapels in the complex, including separate shrines for the 3 boats that took the statues of the gods on their annual trip on the flooding Nile. Sanctuaries, obelisks, and groups of columns all feature accounts of the heroic deeds of the sponsoring pharaoh. The obelisk of Thutmose I, a 71-feet monument, is the only one of 4 original obelisks that is still standing. Major construction work in the precinct of Amun-Re took place during the 18th dynasty when Thebes became the capital of the unified ancient Egypt. Karnak is the home of the god Amun, who was an insignificant local god until the 12th dynasty when Thebes became the capital of Egypt. He was represented in his original state as a goose and later as a ram. At the height of his power he was shown as a human with a headdress of feathers. In ancient times, wars were not fought between countries, but were considered as contests between gods. One deity subduing and replacing another, the victorious god and its people would grow in strength. That is how Amun, with the help of Thutmose III, and various other New Kingdom kings, rose to become the first supreme god of the known world, and was hailed as God of gods. The temple complex of Karnak, dedicated to the pharaoh Amun, was the center of his worship and of his wife Mut, and their son, Khans. Each of them had an area in the temple complex, the greatest and largest belonging to Amun. The term Karnak often is understood as being the precinct of Amun-Re only, because this is the only part most visitors normally see. The 3 other parts, the precinct of Mut, the precinct of Montu, and the dismantled temple of Amenhotep IV, are closed to the public. Montu was the falcon-headed local god. When the pharaoh Akhenaten abandoned the traditional worship of Amun, and took up the worship of Aten, the sun god, he built a temple to Aten at Karnak. But after his death, the Theban priests destroyed all signs of sun worship at Karnak and elsewhere. The earliest known artifact found in the area of the temple is a small, 8-sided temple from the 11th dynasty, which mentions Amun-Re. Amun, sometimes called Amen, was long the local tutelary deity of Thebes. He was identified with the ram and the goose. The Egyptian meaning of Amen is, hidden or, the hidden god. The origin of the word, Amen, used in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, comes from the same word, Amen. This is Avenue of Sphinxes, which is 2 miles long, and is flanked by hundreds of sphinxes. They have the body of a lion, and the head of Pharaoh Nectanego I. It was originally built by Queen Hatshepsut and then, Pharaoh Nectanego I, replaced and rebuilt it. While some have always been visible, much of it was buried or destroyed over the centuries. Now the entire length is being restored. This avenue connects Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple. In ancient times, Egypt had 3 seasons: flood season, growing season, and harvesting season. During the flood season, water will get into the temple, and people will move far away. They had no work during the flood season. As soon as 4 months of flood season would end, people would move in, and construction would continue. There used to be a festival, once a year, during which the image of Amun traveled from Karnak to visit his southern dominion. It was at Luxor Temple that he was transformed into Min, the god of fertility. 2 massive seated statues of Ramesses II guard the huge gateway. 2 80-foot obelisks once accompanied them, but today, only one remains, the other stands in the Place de la Concorde in Paris. The colonnade of Amenhotep III has 7 pairs of 52-foot high open flower papyrus columns, which still support their huge architrave blocks. The reliefs on the walls of the hall bear the names of Tutankhamun, Hormuzd, Seti I, Ramesses II, and Seti II. Tutankhamun decorated the eastern walls, but Hormuzd later erased the name of the boy pharaoh, and inscribed his own. The Feast of Amun in the Acts took place around the middle of the inundation period and lasted 24 days. The sacred boats of the Theban triad were brought from Karnak and carried into the temple of Luxor. There would have been a great procession with musicians, dancers, priests, soldiers, and the chariots of the king. They would have been received at Luxor temple by the priestesses with flowers and offering. Later in the evening the sacred boats would return home to Karnak. Strangely, this boat procession ceremony is still practiced today, although for a different reason. Each year during the Sheikh Yusuf festival, a boat is carried from the Mosque of Al-Hajjaj into the streets of Luxor. The court of Amenhotep III measures 148 feet long by 184 feet wide, with double rows of papyrus columns on 3 sides. Alexander the Great converted this bark chapel into a shrine. Its carved walls show Alexander as pharaoh. The northern end was originally the entrance to the temple. The court leads into the hypostyle hall, which has 32 papyrus columns, arranged in 4 rows of 8 columns. At the rear of the hall are 4 small rooms and an antechamber leading to the birth room, the chapel of Alexander the Great and the sanctuary. The court of Amenhotep III lead into the hypostyle hall, which has 32 papyrus columns, arranged in 4 rows of 8 columns. It was also known as the Hall of Appearance. Here, you can see 2 statues and 2 kinds of flowers, papyrus and lotus. That stands for Egypt having 2 capitals, papyrus flower for Upper Egypt, and lotus flower for Lower Egypt. When he became God, he is seen tying both parts of River Nile with the rope. The temple is about 850 feet long and about 213 feet across, and was built with Nubian sandstone. This sandstone was used for the construction for monuments in Upper Egypt as well as in the course of past and current restoration works. With the layout of the temple, they appear to be of equal height, but using illusionism, it enhances the relative distances, hence making them look the same size to the wall behind it. Due to the Luxor past city population building on top of and around this temple, centuries of rubble had accumulated, to the point where there was an artificial hill some 50 feet in height. Over time, accumulated rubbish of the ages had buried 3/4 of the actual temple. It was removed in order to excavate the site. Edfu Temple is located on the west bank of the Nile River, some 60 miles south of Luxor. Edfu was the capital of the Upper Egypt, an important regional center from the Old Kingdom, partly due to the large area of fertile land belonging to the town, partly to the fact that Edfu was situated near the frontier between Egypt and Nubia. Closer to the eastern tower of the temple pylon, the remains of another pylon have been unearthed dating to the Ramesside period. The temple precinct consisted of the temple itself, within its own enclosure wall, and other subsidiary temples, small chapels, workshops, storehouses, and dwellings. Most of these, including the sacred lake and slaughterhouse, have now either been destroyed or lay under the houses of the present town. South of the temple are the ruins of the mummies, or birth house, a temple in which the birth of the god Harsamantis was celebrated. The scanty architectural remains to the east probably belong to the temple of the sacred falcon. The construction of this temple, dedicated to the falcon god Horus, began on August 23, 237 BC. The architect who designed the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, designed the first stone temple at Edfu. None of its remains have been found. The building was constructed again, during the reign of Ptolemy III, and completed in 57 BC under Ptolemy XII. It was built on the site of an earlier, smaller temple also dedicated to Horus. The previous structure was oriented east-west rather than north-south as in the present site. The Temple of Edfu fell into disuse as Christianity came to Egypt. They banned non-Christian worship within the Roman Empire in 391 AD as elsewhere. Many of the temple's carved reliefs were razed. The blackened ceiling of the Hypostyle Hall, visible today, is believed to be the result of arson intended to destroy religious imagery. They also chiseled some of the scenes off the walls. Christians lived in this temple for 300 years after the Romans invaded Egypt. They defaced many of the carvings as an act of revenge because the Romans had burned down their church. Over the centuries, the temple became buried to a depth of 39 feet beneath drifting desert sand and layers of river silt deposited by the Nile. Local inhabitants built homes directly over the former temple grounds. By looking at the houses of locals, you can tell how deep this temple was buried. A great effort has been made in the excavation. Nowadays, local residents live very close to the temple, and raw sewage seeping into the ground is affecting the temple badly. Having said that, the Temple of Edfu is nearly intact, and a very good example of an ancient Egyptian temple. At the entrance of temple, you can see cobra with arms of Pharaoh Isis, to protect Egypt, reaching from north to south. You can notice a difference between Karnak Temple and Edfu Temple. Here, you see the drawings on columns that are telling us the stories, which is very different than Karnak Temple, where stories on columns are told with cartouche. Here, the mythological battle between Horus and Seth was fought. The temple contains important scenes and inscriptions of that sacred drama. You can listen to the full story of Horus and his uncle, Seth, in the next part of this documentary, along with the Nubian Museum. This room was used to leave offerings that common people would bring to please their gods. You can see some wine, bread, and jars that used to be offered to gods. Here, females are lining up to present their offering to their gods. The Hypostyle Hall is rectangular, and 12 columns support its roof. An entrance beyond the first Hypostyle Hall accesses the inner Hypostyle Hall. 12 columns to the right support its roof. The divine sanctuary is surrounded, on the outside, by 12 rooms, where many religious scenes were depicted on their walls. The number 12 is repeated, and represents 12 months of year. Here, you can see slaves carrying treasure of Pharaoh on this boat. The treasure would be used by the Pharaoh, in the life after death. The front of the boat depicts oars with the fang and sun god over his head, protecting the treasure. At the end of the temple, this is sanctuary of Horus, and is the holiest part of the temple. There is a low pedestal, also from an earlier structure, on which stands a reproduction of the bark of Horus. This divine ceremonial barge was used to carry statue of Horus statue during the processions. On this sacred barge, a golden statue was carried to reunite Horus with his wife Hathor during the annual festival. The original can be seen in the Paris Museum. In this room, you can also see Cartouche of Nectanego II. This small chamber in the western part was dedicated to the consecration of the priest who performed the religious rites on behalf of the king. This temple has excellent scenes that are mesmerizing, and are in excellent shape. The scenes can tell stories of history, how the kings are related to gods, for example, or how a god was born. They will explain what happens in the afterlife, or what role a leader played during a time of war. Ancient Egyptians believed that they could earn a better place in the afterlife, and so they spent lots of time having their great deeds and offerings and qualities explained all over the walls of the temples. They believed that the better job they did of explaining how great they were to their gods, the better chance they had of being important in the afterlife, rather than just another character. The goal was to be granted God status in the afterlife. The larger the figures representing the kings and gods, the more awesome they apparently were. The longer the lists of sacrifices, the more apparent it is that they served their gods well, and thus deserved favor. Lists of what they dedicated to their gods would cover an entire wall: 100 cattle, 240 pheasants, 5 piles of gold, 5 piles of silver, 80 bottles of fragrant oil, etc. Seriously. Big long lists on the walls, next to a picture of the king himself, holding some of the stuff he dedicated to the god. Sometimes the king would be pictured holding a scroll of papyrus in one hand. One can assume that the scroll contains a list of more good deeds of the king, or perhaps descriptions of the greatness of whatever god the king is trying to impress. When Auguste Mariette first began the clearance of Edfu Temple in 1860 BC, the temple had become a village filled with stables and storehouses, the roof of the sanctuary area covered in mud brick houses, and the inner chambers filled with rubbish almost to the ceiling. Fortunately, much conservation work has been done, and tourists and scholars can visit the great temple of Edfu, as well as the other great temples such as Karnak. While the temple is intact, the auxiliary buildings, kitchens, storehouses, slaughterhouses, administrative offices, even the sacred lake, the grove of falcons, and the quay all lie buried under the modern town. So much is known about the construction of the temple, and its sections come from sets of inscriptions within the temple itself. These are called the building texts and were placed on the exterior walls of the sanctuary and the enclosure's walls. But, when you visit, whisper to whatever divinity or force in which you may believe, that Egyptians safeguard their historical heritage with much care and appreciation. One day, their great buildings will be the legacy left to descendants uncounted. Would we not want them to receive a true picture of ourselves? The scenes on the walls are all very important, nothing was thrown up there for entertainment value. The temple at Kamombo is about 30 miles north of Aswan, and about 500 miles to the south of Cairo. Kamombo is an agriculture town surrounded by fields of sugar cane, and corn, and is populated by many Nubians that were displaced after the water of the River Nile flooded their hometowns after the construction of the Nasser Lake. The word Qom in Arabic means a small hill, and the word Ombo, in the hieroglyphic ancient Egyptian language, means the gold. Therefore, the word Qom Ombo means the hill of the gold. The town is located very close to a region in which gold was mined. The town was very important for the ancient Egyptians in the economical aspect. Having said that, the town never really flourished except when the Ptolemies took control of Egypt. In ancient times, Qom Ombo was an important crossroads between the caravan route from Nubia and trails from the gold mines in the eastern desert. The Qom Ombo temple was built with limestone in the shape of a rectangle on a high dune overlooking the Nile. Cruises often stop here and let the passengers out so that they can see the temple. The temple is unusual because it is a double temple. Northern side was dedicated to the god falcon god Herodes, who was also known as Horus the Elder, Tusanet Noveret, and Pain Ptah. Southern side was dedicated to crocodile god Sabik, god of fertility, and creator of the world with Hathor and Khonsu. Both gods are accompanied by their families. In ancient times, sacred crocodiles basked in the sun on the river bank near here. About 300 crocodile mummies have been discovered in the vicinity. The design is almost perfectly symmetrical, with two side-by-side sanctuaries and two parallel passageways leading through the outer parts of the temple. The design of the temple starts with a front courtyard, a hypostyle hall following it, 3 inner halls, and then 2 sanctuaries, one dedicated to Sabik and the other to Horus. To the sides of the inner halls, there are 7 chambers, 3 of them situated in the eastern section of the temple while the others are located in the western part. Moreover, the temple has many antechambers and smaller rooms that were used for different rituals and several purposes. The older temple was erected during the reigns of King Thutmose III, and then during the ruling period of Queen Hatshepsut, whose marvelous temple is still standing in the west bank of Luxor, and both belong to the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. What you see today was started on the ruins of the older temple by Ptolemy VI, Philometor in the early 2nd century BC. Ptolemy XIII built the outer and inner hypostyle halls. During his reign, this area was a training depot for African war elephants. Outer enclosure wall and part of the court were built by Augustus sometime after 30 BC, and are mostly gone. The most glorious days of Qom Ombo came when the Romans ruled over Egypt as it became the capital and the administration center of the province. During this period, a large portion of the temple was constructed and many other sections were restored and renovated. Much of the temple has been destroyed by the Nile, earthquakes, and later builders who used its stones for other projects. Some of the reliefs inside were defaced by Copts who once used the temple as a church. All the temple's buildings were cleared of debris and restored by in 1893. The stone differs from all the other temples perhaps because it was covered with sand for so long. This temple is full of beautiful scenes that depict how advanced the ancient Egyptian culture was. The scene on the inner face of the second enclosure rear wall of the temple is of particular interest. The outer corridor between the Ptolemaic temple and the Roman enclosure wall bears reliefs including Marcus Aurelius offering a pectoral to Taciturn, the good sister and wife of Herodotus, back left, and depictions of surgical tools which are quite sophisticated for 2000 years ago. The second vestibule is the Hall of Offerings. Only priests were admitted here. The chamber on the right was used to store vestments and sacred texts. Reliefs on the southern wall include offerings to Osiris, a woman giving birth, and a description of the temple and dedication to Sebek. The right side is dedicated to the crocodile god combined with the sun god Re, along with his wife Hathor and their son Consur. Sebek is associated with Seth, the enemy of Horus. In the myth of Horus and Osiris, Seth and his followers changed themselves into crocodiles to escape. The ancient Egyptians believed that by honoring the fearsome crocodile as a god, they would be safe from attacks. The left side is dedicated to Osiris, the falcon-headed god Horus the Elder, along with his consort Tassintinfer, the good sister. Entrance to the temple complex is via the gate of Neos Dionysos, only half of which still stands. Its date is not certain, but the general consensus is that he is Ptolemy XII, 8150 BC, the father of Cleopatra. Like other Egyptian temples, Kamambo had a great pylon, but this was washed away by the Nile long ago. Most of the forecourt is gone as well, with only low walls and stumps of pillars remaining. This section was added in the Roman era under Trajan. The main site at Kamambo is the beautiful outer hypostyle hall, with 15 thick columns topped with floral capitals and a cornice decorated with carved winged sun discs. The bases of the columns bear the heraldic lily of Upper Egypt and the papyrus symbol of the Nile Delta. Significant portions of the roof remain, which are decorated with flying vultures and astronomical imagery. On the outer wall on the left, Neos Dionysos is shown being purified by Thoth and Horus. On the right a similar scene occurs in the presence of Sebek, whose face has been destroyed. On the inner wall on the right are especially fine carvings of Neos Dionysos being crowned before Osiris, Sebek, Wajet and Nekhbet. The west side of the inner wall has Neos Dionysos appearing before Isis, Horus the Elder, and a lion-headed god. In the back of the hall, the king makes offerings to the same deities. The inner hypostyle hall is older and has 10 slender columns. There is a relief of Sebek in his snake form on the south wall between the portals. In the southwest corner, Ptolemy II receives the sword of victory from Osiris in the presence of the wife and sister of the king. Abu Simbel is the location of the most famous temple of Ramesses II. The most spectacular aspect of this temple is its setting in the solid rock above the banks of the Nile River between the first and second cataracts. As impressive as Abu Simbel is, it probably would not be quite as famous were it not for its relocation because of the construction of the Aswan High Dam. Between January 1966 and September 1968, the restoration work crews carved the temples into over 1,000 pieces. Some of the blocks weighed as much as 30 tons apiece. They were removed and raised over 200 feet. The pieces were then reassembled on an artificial hill above the reach of Lake Nasser. In 1257 BC, Pharaoh Ramesses II had 2 temples carved out of solid rock at a site on the west bank of the Nile south of Aswan in the land of Nubia and known today as Abu Simbel. Long before Ramses II, The site had been sacred to Hathor of Absek. The temple built by Ramses, however, was dedicated to the sun gods Amun-Ra and Re-Horeb. Because of their remote location near the Sudanese border in southern Egypt, the temples were unknown until their rediscovery in 1813. The sacred area, marked out as a forecart and bounded on the north and south sides by brick walls, occupied a place between the sandstone cliffs and the river. Ramesses' temple was cut into the face of the cliff, before which is a rock-cut terrace. The temple is approached across this terrace up a flight of steps with an inclined plane in the middle, and enclosed on either side by a balustrade behind which stood a row of hawks and statues of Ramesses in various forms. The rock-cut facade of Ramesses' temple represents the front of a pylon in front of which are four colossal seated figures of Ramses. This facade is 119 feet wide, and 100 feet high, while the colossal statues are 67 feet in height. At the top of the pylon, above the cornice, is a row of baboons, who, as watchers of the dawn, are shown with their hands raised in adoration of the rising sun. The Egyptians believed baboons played a role in helping the sun god Ra defeat the darkness of night, and so were believed sacred to the worship of the rising sun. The four-seated statues of Ramesses are about 20 meters in height. At the feet of Ramesses stand the statues of his favorite children. Many stelae were found at the southern end of the temple, including the famous marriage stela. This stela describes the arrival of the Hittite princess to Egypt to marry Ramesses following the treaty with the Hittites. Inside the temple, 8 Osiris statues of Ramesses II are attached to pillars and support the roof. Today there are big celebrations at the temple on these 2 days. The walls depict scenes which show Ramesses' greatness in battle. Ramses was particularly proud of his victory at the Battle of Kadesh and depicted this on numerous monuments including this temple. Scholars today believe this battle with the Hittites was a stalemate. The actual interior of the temple is inside the cliff in the form of a man-made cave cut out of the living rock. It consists of a series of halls and rooms extending back a total of 185 feet from the entrance. The long first hall is 54 feet wide and 58 feet deep and has 2 rows of Osiris statues of Ramesses each 30 feet high. Those on the north side are shown wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, while those on the south were wearing the double crown of Lower Egypt. At the west end of the main hall are 3 doors, the side ones leading into lateral chambers, and the central one opening into a room with 4 square pillars. From this room a doorway leads to the vestibule, and beyond that is located the innermost shrine with seated statues of the gods Ptah, Amun-Ra, the deified Ramesses II, and Re-Horeb. The most remarkable feature of the site is that the temple is precisely oriented so that twice every year, on 22nd of February and 22nd of October, the first rays of the morning sun shine down the entire length of the temple cave to illuminate the back wall of the innermost shrine and the statues of the 4 gods seated there. These 2 days were the birthday and coronation day of Ramesses II. Thousands of tourists come during those days to witness the event. The second rock-cut temple at Abu Simbel lies close by to the north of the Great Temple and is similar in plan but on a smaller scale. It was built in honor of Ramesses' great wife and most favored of his consorts, Nefertari. This smaller monument is dedicated to the goddess Hathor. The facade of the temple shows Nefertari on each side of the entrance standing between two colossal statues of Ramesses, again with smaller images of royal children at their feet. Never before had a queen been depicted alongside her husband and on the same scale, on the facade of a temple. The temple interior is very simple and built on a much more human scale than the Great Temple. It shows Nefertari participating in the divine ritual in the same capacity as her husband. Scenes on the walls of the pillared hall depict Nefertari taking part in divine rituals with her husband before Hathor and Mut and in the same role as the king. They also show the consecration of Nefertari as divine queen. There are traditional scenes of the pharaoh Ramesses II in his warrior role of slaying captives. 6 square pillars set in 2 rows and crowned with Hathor heads give a very gentle and feminine feel to the monument. In the sanctuary at the rear of the temple, a statue in high relief seems to grow out of the rock wall, showing Hathor as the sacred cow goddess emerging from the western mountain. Chambers open to the north and south of the vestibule with colorful scenes showing Hathor on her sacred bark. The side chambers have a cave-like feel, being carved from the mountain rock. Nubian Museum in Aswan exhibits material recovered from ancient pharaoh tombs, temples and settlements. The internal halls contain 50 invaluable pieces dating back to prehistoric times. 503 pieces belong to the pharaonic period, 52 of Coptic era, 103 of Islamic age, 140 of Nubian era, in addition to 360 pieces reflecting the history of Aswan. The largest part of the museum is occupied by the monumental pieces, reflecting phases of the development of the Nubian culture and civilization. Osiris is often considered to be the first ancient Egyptian god to be officially recorded in written scripts of ancient Egypt. Many of his carvings and inscriptions have been found in tombs and pyramids throughout Egypt. He is the god of afterlife. Anywhere in Egypt I went to, all tour guides were eager to told me the same story about Osiris in almost the same version. Let me share the story. According to the Egyptian mythology, the sun god Ra was the first ruler of land. His wisdom and predictions told him that the child of goddess Nut would be his successor. Feeling insecure, Ra cursed Nut, saying that she would not be able to give birth to a child on any day of the year. A heartbroken Nut went to Thoth, the god of wisdom, for help. Thoth assured her not to worry and in turn challenged Kenzu, the moon god, and challenged him for a game of checkers. Kenzu accepted the challenge and the two began to gamble. Thoth kept on winning the games and the stakes started climbing higher and higher. In the game, Kenzu lost a lot of his light to Thoth. Thoth made up 5 days between the beginning and end of the year, from the light that he had won. Nut gave birth to Osiris in the first of the 5 days. As the legend continues, Ra became very old and left Earth to rule the heavens. According to prediction of Ra, Osiris indeed succeeded him. During the initial stages of Osiris' rule, the people displayed savage behavior. They constantly engaged in fights, showed signs of cannibalism, which greatly disturbed Osiris. He decided to make his people civilized. He started by teaching his people the activity of farming. He taught his people to plant, tend and harvest wheat and barley crops. He taught his people to grind the wheat grain into flour and make bread. It is said that Osiris, also developed the technique of wine making. He taught them the basic laws of civilization, and also introduced the arts of poetry and music. The popularity of Osiris made his brother Seth jealous. Seth was the god of evil. After Osiris had managed to civilize his people, he left on a journey to spread wisdom all over the world. Upon his return, both brothers fell in love with Isis. But Isis falls in love with Osiris. Seth got jealous and planned to send Osiris far away or have him killed so that he could marry Isis. According to legend, Seth brought a big sarcophagus, the same size of his brother, and asked him to lay down in it. As soon as Osiris lays down, Seth closed the cover. Then, Seth, with the help of his slaves, carried it to the River Nile, and threw it in there. When Isis could not find Osiris, she used her magic to find the sarcophagus that was floated to present-day Lebanon. She brought it back, opened it up, and found out that Osiris is still alive. While she was crying with emotions, Osiris asked her to marry him. She accepted, and both got married. They slept together that night and Isis got pregnant. The next day, Seth found out that Osiris is not just alive, but has gotten married with Isis as well. Seth killed Osiris by cutting him into 14 pieces, and scattered one piece in each of the 13 cities of the kingdom, and the 14th part, Osiris' penis, into River Nile. After giving birth to a beautiful boy Ors, Isis left in search of the pieces of her husband, while leaving Ors, in the care of goddess Buto, represented as a cobra. Isis found all the pieces except one part that was thrown in the River Nile and fish had eaten it. Isis gathered up the pieces and created the first mummy. Since then, the Egyptians took up the rituals of mummification. Ors, as a child, heard the whole story from his mother. When Ors became old enough, he wanted to take a revenge of his father. Ors fought with his uncle, Seth, on several places and finally killed him. Unfortunately, he missed one eye during this battle. Any temple we visit, we will see an eye. This is the eye of protection representing God Ors. Ors became the god of the sun, war and protection. Even today, in Egypt, if a husband is not a good one and wife gets angry, she calls him Seth. Osiris became one of the most important deities of ancient Egypt. The people of ancient Egypt believed in the concept of life after death. Hence, Osiris was the presiding god of all the ceremonies and rituals like mummification and burial. Osiris was also considered to be the god of resurrection and eternal life. He was also the protector of the dead, and was also considered as the judge of the deceased. Nubian are the people of southern Egypt and northern Sudan, settling along the banks of the Nile from Aswan. The Old Nubian language is attested from the 8th century, and is thus the oldest recorded language of Africa. Egyptian and Nubian deities alike were worshipped in Nubia for 2,500 years, even while Nubia was under the control of the New Kingdom of Egypt. Today, Nubian practice Islam. Nubian are very proud of their culture. I got an invitation to attend a Nubian engagement party and I accepted the offer immediately. Enjoy watching the party.
عروسة. عروسة؟ My cousin.
Well, is it snack? So what is it snack?
Good.
هنجيبك خلاص يلا بينا. تعال يلا.
كلم عمو اعمل كده
لوكا فعلا يا مروه
سلام عليك مالك
جيبوني مرجع
عم الشيخ
انا اتعمل لي قضيه ده معزه ولا خروف ما خلاص ما بقتش اشوف والشيطان وعامل لك مش شايفيش كفايه في رقاصيش وانت جاي لي زياره كلم النصارى اكتبني بقى بيتي بالجرس خربت بيتي اكتبني بقى بيتي بالجرس خربت بيتي معايا ما تكلش انا ما باكلش كرانشي سلام للدقيقة وبطل
خليها معاك خليها
بالجرس
معاك
خربت بيتي السجن بقى بيتي بالجرس خربت بيتي
خدها معاك خدها معاك
انا ما باكلش
خدها معاك
عشت قديم
خليها معاك
Ay, que salame.
واحد من كل اتنين، مش عايزين خلاص حاجة تاني.